Hello, Gina! Merry Christmas! How are you? Happy St. Petra's Day. Welcome to Ukrasia. Beautiful, beautiful Ukrasia. Cold Ukrasia. Currently minus 42. But not too bad. If it was any colder, I would need gloves. Anyway, maybe I should say Happy Red Truck Day. Seems I got you lots of stuff with red trucks. Well, it is not only a popular North American Christmas sentiment, the red truck, but for me it has personal meaning as well, because my grandfather, believe it or not, actually purchased a red truck back in the 1950s and had it imported to Ukrasia, right from the factory in Detroit. Amazing car. He used to drive around on the farm with it. That is what I used to learn to drive a car with. So my first experience was driving a red truck. And I have much heartfelt, what's the word for it? Heartfelt emotion for the red truck. Beautiful, beautiful vehicle. So I hope you enjoy your red truck stuff. You will notice you do have the red truck bag, the red truck St. Petra's Day tag. You have a red truck squeezy soapy thing with flashing lights. You also have a do-it-yourself painted red thing. What I did not get to you this year for St. Petra's Day is Ukrasian booze. Strange that I would not do that. However, I did get you Scottish booze, so I hope you like your gin. It looks like a very interesting gin to me. Very different, very different. I hope you like it. Anyway, however, I did get you something Ukrasian, and you are probably looking at it like, well, this isn't Ukrasian. These are licorice all sorts with a weird tag that says, lick it or your soul will die. Well, have you ever wondered where licorice all sorts come from? Because you are right. They are what we know now as licorice all sorts. But if we go back in our time machine, maybe get in our DeLorean or our phone box or something else, or TARDIS, whatever, you will find that licorice all sorts weren't always licorice all sorts. And what I have done is I have given you a brief history of the licorice all sort, also known as the lick it or your soul will die poisonous licorice bonbon. So here it is. History of lick it or your soul will die. The history of the licorice all sort goes back several hundred years, to a time when people's belief systems were very different, when people were much more secular and fearful of the unknown. It was the medieval days, and instruments of torture came in various forms and fashions, and the confectionery now known as the licorice all sort was just another feature in the Ukrasian arsenal of interrogation. You see, Ukrasia doesn't like crime, and we never have done. That is why our country has the lowest per capita rate of crime in the entire world. We are very good, not only at policing, but also dissuading would-be criminals from following such a path. One such dissuasion is fear, and in the Middle Centuries, the Ukrasian High Council came up with a brilliant plan to discourage any illegal activity within the borders of their country. As I said before, it was a different time, and one of the biggest fears that people had in those days was that of losing their soul. And the Ukrasian High Council pounced on this fear and quote-unquote leaked out that they had a device that could not only separate a person from their soul, but could also terminate the soul, thus ensuring that it could not go on to live another life. Of course, it was all an elaborate hoax, but the fact that it, quote-unquote, leaked out gave it credence, and before long this idea of soul destruction became a rumor, and then finally a belief all over Ukrasia and the surrounding countries. Well, this certainly worked, and both the king and the Ukrasian High Council, or just the council, were both very happy with the results. But of course, there was still crime and subsequent criminals to punish, and this is where the lick it or your soul will die bonbons came into play. You see, if somebody got caught for a major crime, like murder, rape, treason, espionage, or even pissing on one of the king's trees, they faced execution. Now granted, the last one was a little ridiculous, but the king at that time was old and senile, and took a great fancy to his trees. He also had many pairs of shoes for some reason. But I digress. Upon arrest and incarceration, a prisoner was offered a choice of pleading guilty or not guilty. If they chose guilty, then they were guaranteed that their soul would live on after their execution, where it could find another mortal body and make amends for their previous life choices. However, if they chose not guilty, then they were taken to the high tower and left in a room for a day or two to rethink their response. Now the thing about these prisoners was they were all guilty of the crimes for which they were arrested. The council were not big on wasting time and did their due diligence when it came to finding guilty parties. So if one got arrested for something major, it was pretty much guaranteed that they were guilty of it. There was none of this arresting people just because. These people were guilty, regardless of their plea. Only once were the council wrong and sent the king's guard after the wrong person. But in their defense, it was a case of mistaken identity, as the man arrested was in fact the twin brother of the man who would later be executed for murdering 15 women and children on the outskirts of Muka. After the execution of the innocent man, the council admitted their mistake and handsomely compensated his widow for her loss. But in all other cases, the council got their man, or occasionally their woman. And now it's time to bring the lick it or your soul will die licorice bonbons into the story. Now remember, those who choose not guilty as their response were taken to the high tower to think about their choice. In this room, from which there was no escape at all, they were chained to a table and dressed in what people today might call a onesie, except this onesie was tied tight and could not be removed without cutting it off. After a couple of days, a man referred to as the Harbinger would visit the not guilty party on behalf of the council and ask them once again if they were guilty or not guilty. Now the Harbinger was also the executioner, so he did double duty and was ultimately known as the Harbinger of Death. But again, I digress. So after asking the prisoner whether they were guilty or not guilty, the Harbinger could do one of two things. If the prisoner changed their mind, then he or she would be removed from the high tower and summarily executed with their soul intact. However, if they maintained their innocence, the Harbinger would place a tray of poisonous licorice bonbons on the table, put one in front of the prisoner and say, "Lick it or your soul will die." At this point, the prisoner, fearing for his or her soul, would lick the poison bonbon and experience an immediate gag reflex. This would be followed by nausea and stomach cramps, and within 5 minutes the prisoner would suffer extreme vomiting and explosive diarrhea. Now remember, they were dressed in a tight one-piece outfit, so there was nowhere for the liquids to go. So on top of the physical symptoms, there was also a secondary layer of physical discomfort and degradation. However, within 15 minutes or so, the symptoms would dissipate and the prisoner would believe he or she had proven their innocence, having beaten the poison. At this point, the Harbinger would ask them once again if they were guilty or not guilty. Just like before, if the prisoner changed their mind, then he or she would be removed from the high tower and summarily executed with their soul intact, a reward for admission of guilt. However, if they still maintained their innocence, the Harbinger would put another poison bonbon in front of the prisoner and say, "Lick it or your soul will die." Having already beaten the poison once, the prisoner would gladly lick another one. But this time the extreme vomiting and explosive diarrhea was instantaneous. You see, the poison that was already in the system was reactivated, and now the addition of poison led to more wonderful symptoms, like bleeding from the nose, the mouth, the ears, and the eyes, a wonderful concoction of psychological and physical torture that led most to a screaming fit, where they would happily admit guilt just to escape the effects of the poison. Of course, for those who suffered through it, they would find their symptoms dissipating within 15 minutes or so, and would once again believe they had beaten the poison and proved their innocence. Again, the Harbinger would ask them if they were guilty or not guilty. But after surviving 2 rounds, it was rare a prisoner would concede, and the harbinger will once again put another poison bonbon in front of the prisoner and say, "Lick it, or your soul will die." Unbeknownst to the prisoner, this round was usually fatal, as the poison would reintroduce the symptoms of the first 2 rounds, but this time add a bonus of internal bleeding and extreme pain to the menu. The internal organs would start to dissolve, and within minutes they would bleed out. Most of them would cry for mercy before death and admit their guilt to save their soul. But in the cases of the truly defiant, the harbinger would stand over them and make sure they knew the consequences should they not admit to their crime. Some would admit guilt with their last gasp, but on occasion the harbinger would have to report there was death without admission. This wasn't a big deal to the council, but they did like to get that guilty admission just to make their records look better. Of course, there was one instance where there was no admission and no death. This particular man survived 3 rounds of poison, and the council were so impressed that they intervened and actually made him a deal. His name was Vladimir, a giant horseman from the north, who had been charged with treason for selling the location of the king's secret getaway home to would-be assassins. He actually maintained his innocence due to his belief the king was corrupt, and it just so happened that on the day of his interrogation, the king passed away, and upon surviving 3 rounds of poison, the council thought maybe he'd like to live under a new king, on the condition he joined the king's guard. Well, Vladimir agreed, and after healing, he not only joined the king's guard, but went on to become captain and eventually received the St. Petra's Medal of Bravery for saving the new king's life in the famous Battle of Blood. Of course, having the new king's ear, Vladimir told the king about the barbarism of the poison bonbon interrogation, and over time the practice was dissolved, never to be used again. Flash forward several hundred years, and a local confectioner named Anton, who lived just outside of Muka, decided to resurrect the poison bonbons, but with a twist. Instead of poison, he added sweets to the licorice, and they became a novelty gift for occasions like St. Petra's Day, whereby you could challenge your friends to a game of lick it or your soul will die. It actually reintroduced that part of Ukrainian history, and several plays and novels were written about it, Vladimir, of course, being a central character in all of them. But like so many things of foreign culture, this too became a victim of Anglicization, and suddenly the licorice sweets were mass-produced and became what most people know now as licorice all sorts. But just so you know, when you're eating one of these yummy morsels, remember Vladimir, and make sure they are indeed sweets and not licorice poisonous bonbons. So here's hoping you don't cramp up when you eat one.
And there it was. And now you are probably wondering, what would the 4th round do? Well, let me tell you what the 4th round would do. If you manage to survive 3 rounds and go for a 4th round, guess what? It would melt your brain. It would literally melt your brain. None of the original poisons, they would go into your brain, they would go to your internal organs, they would go to your skin, they would go and make you vomit and diarrhea, stuff like that. It never actually went into your brain. The 4th round goes into your brain, and guess what? Your brain melts and you die on the spot. So it is a good thing that Vladimir never went for round 4, or the history of the entire situation and subject would have changed dramatically. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed your history of the licorice all sort. I hope you enjoy tasting them. I hope you don't enjoy the after effects that Vladimir had. And I hope you have a very happy St. Petra's Day and a Merry Christmas. I hope you got everything you wanted, plus more. Lots of bubbly, lots of chocolates, lots of neat gifts. And for now, I have to go back and warm up because it is freaking cold out here. The temperature has dropped another 4 degrees just since I've been standing here. I'm pushing -50 now. Almost time for gloves. So once again, happy St. Petra's Day. Merry Christmas to you and yours. Have a good one. Bye.